Okay, today we'll be covering legal issues. This is chapter 4. When surveillance was first introduced to the corporate business environment, when we first started using surveillance as a mean to determine the validity of a claim, in other words, how valid was it? Was it exaggerated? Was it real? Were the reported injuries real, or were they exaggerated? The only way to find that out was to go out and actually do surveillance on the individual when they least expected it, when they didn't realize that they would be being watched. If you can, a person, when they know that they're in front of their doctor or their insurance company, may act differently than how they'll act when they're around their house. Or even better is when they're around their house and all of their family members are gone. Or if they're out shopping and they're by themselves and there are no family members. Or they're even away from their small hometown doing something and there's really no one that knows them. That's probably the best example. A lot of times that's why we like doing surveillance around the holidays, because people may leave their hometown, go on vacation, and when they're on vacation, they really let their guard down. They want to enjoy themselves. They're on vacation. They don't think that there's anybody around that knows them. So if the surveillant is there and he followed them to wherever it is that they're vacationing, he has the opportunity to get some really good video. I remember a case one time that I was to do surveillance. It was in Orlando. It was over a holiday weekend of some sort. And I was sitting surveillance, and it was obvious that no one was around. So I called the house, and there was a message on the recording that said, sorry we're not home, in Daytona Beach this weekend. If you need to contact me, we'll be at the Tradewinds Hotel. So this was a person that was just letting her friends know, whoever called, that she was in Daytona Beach and she was going to be at the Tradewinds Hotel. So I went up there and found out what room they were in. They were in a room that actually faced another smaller hotel. I was able to get a room directly across from theirs, where I would get up in the morning. I'd get up earlier, have my coffee, be staring at their room. I saw the woman's husband come outside, sit outside, drink his coffee, basically watching him. And then when they came out to go to the beach or to go to the pool, I came out of my room and I followed them. The video I got was of her jumping waves on the beach with her daughter. Got her swimming in the pool of the hotel. Again, it was video when she, least expected it. Now, in the very early days, judges who are normally sympathize with the injured worker, judges are, by nature, are there to protect, the people, to do what he feels is reasonable in any decision that he makes in reference to being faced with an insurance company, this big, powerful insurance company doing an investigation on this poor person who just happened to get hurt at work. So the insurance company has a lot of resources. They have a lot of money and a lot of resources, whereas the injured worker doesn't have all those resources at their exposure. So it's up to the judge to make sure that there's a level playing field, to make sure that your rights are protected. Well, when he was all of a sudden given a videotape of your activity when you didn't know it and you were at the beach, he had to wonder, is this an invasion of your privacy? Can these And the judge didn't necessarily have to decide that, but the opposing counsel, the claimant's attorney, he would be the one that would start to wonder to himself, because this was new evidence, is this an invasion of my client's right to privacy? And of course those cases went through the court system and they were challenged, and it was pretty much determined that if you're in the public view, that the insurance company has every right and the investigator has every right to film you. Thinking to myself. So then, where does invasion of privacy, I mean, where and how does invasion of privacy ever come into this? And from an investigator standpoint, we need to understand what is invasion of privacy, just so that we make sure that we don't cross the line when we're doing surveillance. On the other hand, to get back to an earlier point, the plaintiff's attorneys are always going to argue, this was an invasion of my subject's privacy, or he realizes how damaging that video is, and he's going to try everything he can to try to keep that evidence out being submitted. He's going to ask, was the videotape altered in any way? Did you cut and splice pieces together to make my client look bad, when in fact there were periods of time when she came out of the water and maybe held her back, or laid down in the sand and got a massage because she was in pain? So they'll look for every way they can to try to discredit the video. They might even attack the investigator. What's your background? And of course they're going off on tangents. They're going off on things that have no real bearing on the actual videotape, but they're trying to find something. They're trying to direct their questioning towards the investigator to kind of take it away from the video. Especially if the video has already been entered into evidence, they now will try to discredit the investigator. So in the very early days, we found ourselves in court routinely. Anytime you got video, you found yourself in court being usually attacked or cross-examined or interrogated by the plaintiff over that video. They wanted to know what kind of camera we used, what was the what's the resolution of the camera, what type of tape. In the very early days when we used motion picture film, they wanted to know at what speed was the film running, because we could change the speed of our motion picture film. If you've ever watched some of the really old black and white movies with Charlie Chaplin and whatnot, they show them all sped up. Well, we could do that with our camera. We could slow it down, we could speed it up. We could also do that when we showed the video or showed the movie. When we would come into a courtroom, they would have to turn off the lights. We'd have to get a screen put up. We'd have a projector, and we would show the actual film, like in a movie theater, and we'd have to set the speed. And if we set it wrong, they might be moving a little too fast, and that would be an area that we would be criticized for or interrogated about. So it was a very trying time, and of course I'm talking about the early 1980s, when every time you had video, it was all untested, unproven ground. We were pretty much setting the case law as far as entering video or motion picture film in on a mostly insurance-related case. These are the cases that I have been practicing in during the last 30 years. So we found ourselves all the time making sure that our video or our motion picture or whatever media it was that we shot the footage in was entered into evidence. Today, pretty much it's accepted. It's been tried and tested. People have argued it up and down, and they really find that if there's some really good videotape, the best thing for them to do is to settle and keep it out of the courtroom. So now we get good video, we rarely ever go to court. You know, I've gone to court maybe 2 times last year. Now I'm not working as many cases as I used to work, but still, you know, the ratio should be greater if it was, you know, something that they wanted to challenge, but they don't want to challenge it today. So, but let's move on. So our video, we know that we can shoot video when the subject is in a public place. So now we need to completely understand what invasion of privacy is. Now, there's no constitution or law that says you have a right to privacy. What the Constitution says is that the government will not interfere with your private life. But there's no right that says you have a right to not be surveilled or not be followed. There is no, they are not constitutionally given rights. But in general, we have what we perceive as rights of privacy, and how they relate to an invasion of your privacy. And some of those are pretty simple. Like, if you have a fence around the outside of your property and it's at least 6 foot high, we call that a privacy fence. Now, if it's a 6 foot high chain link fence, obviously that's not a privacy fence. The fence would have to be a stockade fence or a solid PVC, white PVC fence. Any type of solid fence, 6 feet high, is considered a privacy fence. Now, what you do in that area, you have an expectation of privacy. You feel that what you do there is going to not be open to the public. You might sunbathe nude in that area and feel comfortable about it. Now, if somebody decided to climb a tree next door and shoot video over, from the tree, over your fence into your backyard and capture what you're doing, okay, he's invading your privacy. If someone would happen to go up to the fence, pull a board out so that there's a little piece that he could see through and put a camera in there, invading your privacy. You might even live in a rural community where you have hedge or greenery all the way around your property. Again, you expect that the area in which you live, surrounded by a hedge or thick greenery, is going to create a backyard where you have an expectation of privacy. Therefore, if an investigator goes in there, cuts his way through, cuts a hole out in your hedge so that he can see you, there's a possibility that he's once again invading your privacy. Now, the other two areas of invasion of privacy are not what you would normally think of. The other two areas of right to privacy relate to what they call appropriation. And that's when a person's name or likeness is used for a commercial advantage. That would be like me trying to take your image and put it on a bobblehead doll and make money on it because you're a very successful person. That's why we can't take, people have patents or they have copyright on their, and we can't take, a Elvis Presley picture and make an Elvis Presley doll and not expect to pay the Elvis Presley Foundation for the money that we would receive. We would have to have some licensing agreement with them. So The rights of privacy include your right that somebody doesn't take your likeness and use it. So we have someone can't peek over your fence. They can't invade an area that you have an expectation of privacy. And they can't use your likeness. That's another invasion of your privacy. Now the final one, the final aspect would be when someone, what we call casting a false light on your character. One of the things that we can't do, we can't go and we can't sit in front of your house to do surveillance and sit directly in front of your house and say, say to ourselves, come on outside, move, go somewhere. Say, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here every day. Wherever you go, I'm going to follow you. You can't do that because that's bordering on harassment, where the person obviously sees you there. And you know that they know you're there. The whole purpose that you're there is to let them know that you're not going away until the case is settled. Well, that's intimidation, harassment. There's other laws for that. They're going to cart you away as a private investigator. I've even had clients say to me, John, I'm going to give you a week of surveillance, just go sit in front of his house. Let him know that we're going to watch him every day. And I have to say to the client, I can't do that. We can't do that. That's harassment. We can't sit down the road in the front seat with our arms sticking out, staring at the person's house and letting all the neighbors, see us. And maybe they walk up to us and they say, what are you doing? Say, I'm watching Maria. I'm a detective. Well, now I'm making it sound like Maria did something wrong. When in fact, we're just determining the validity of the claim. The person may have a completely valid claim. Why are you making it look like they did something wrong? The word detective on them makes it sound like they did something criminally wrong. So you can't shed a false light in the community that that person has done something wrong through your actions. That's where you get into all that slander and liable if you write something about them, or slander if you're telling the neighbors, oh yeah, I'm watching her. She claims she's injured. And what? And you don't believe her? You think she's lying? I mean, those are the connotations that we're giving by the fact that we're there watching her and we're kind of representing in our own actions that she did something wrong and I'm there to catch her. Well, that might not be the truth. The person may be legitimately hurt. So that's why we say when you do surveillance, you're going to go to the neighborhood, you're going to do your job, and you're going to leave the neighborhood, and no one's going to ever know you were there. There are lots of instances where I am sure that our government and some of the very top investigators in our government have gone out to do some investigations in our communities. I mean, I'm 50, you're 30 years old, we've been around a while, but yet we don't know anybody that's ever been questioned by a senior member of our law enforcement community. Does that mean that it's never happened? No. It means that they were so good that we didn't even realize that the contact that was made with us was part of an investigation. They might have taken your neighbor's trash early in the morning and you never knew it. They might have taken your trash. Might have taken my trash. I don't know. Any investigator worth his weight in salt. And you know why they say that? Worth their weight in salt? Salt used to be a...
Rich.
Yeah, a very highly regarded commodity because with salt you can keep all your food from spoiling. So, anybody that's like any investigator is going to know that one of the things that he needs to do is to get that person's trash. Find out when the collection day is. Make sure they're there. Maybe do it 2-3 times. Maybe do it towards the end of the month. But to make sure they get that trash. Because that trash is going to have, hopefully, pieces of the puzzle as to what that individual's activities may consist of. You're certainly going to find out what they eat. That's going to tell you a little bit about them. Might tell you if they smoke, if they drink coffee, if they eat a lot of fruit. It could be nasty. So the 3 areas regarding a subject's right to privacy as it pertains to surveillance investigators would be the invading an area where they expect that their privacy is, that they're going to have or be private. Like in the book here, it shows a picture of a guy climbing up the side of a building and peeking through someone's window.
I mean,
Certainly, if that's your bedroom, you feel that you have a reasonable amount of privacy in there, and if someone's peeking in there, obviously that would not constitute a reasonable attempt to determine your activity by peeking through your window. So we have a subject in public view cannot successfully contend that his or her actions are secret. If they're out in the public, whatever they do, they can't say that what they were doing was secret. So if I follow that person to the beach, and no matter what I got her doing, if she was doing it out in the public, she can't say, you invaded my privacy.
Quick question.
Yes.
If you are doing surveillance on someone, and they have a huge window, and it's nighttime, and the light is really bright, and this person claims that it's very hurt, but you see this person dancing crazy, are you allowed to take film from there because you can see it from the street?
Mm-hmm. Well, there might be some investigators that would shy away from that. And it may depend on who you work for and what their company's policy is about shooting video of a person in their house. But, if we're going to consider ourselves professional investigators and we're going to do what we need to do in order to accomplish our goal, and we feel that it falls within the scope of being a reasonable surveillance, if that person is in the window and I can see that person from the street and I am videotaping that person from the street as my eyes without zooming into the house, without increasing or enhancing the focus or the content of what I'm seeing, I would videotape it, and I have videotaped it many times. I talked to you about, I think I spoke earlier about an incident in Tampa where there was a woman and a man that,
oh yes, yes you did,
liked to do sexual acts in front of a window at night, and that they knew that they had people watching them. And those people happened to be the community kids. And one of the parents found out and came over and videotaped the activity. And those people were subsequently charged with, I believe, like lewd and lascivious activity. Whereas some people would contend that they were inside their home, and what they did inside their home was within what they felt was a private area, and they had an expectation of privacy. But it was clear that they were by the window. Any reasonable person would know that what they were doing could be seen from the street.
Okay.
So always try to use that reasonable? What does it seem reasonable what I'm doing? Does it seem that a group of my peers, if they were all sitting here and we were talking about it or discussing it, would they feel that my actions were reasonable? That I videotaped this person in front of the window because I could see them? I've had cases where I videotaped them from the street, knowing full well that if I was actually on the sidewalk, the image of the person inside the house would even be bigger. And I just kept it to what I could see from the street, just to further my my argument. If I had to make it, I would say, and I put it in my report, this activity was videotaped from the street. I didn't use any high-powered lens to zoom into their house. And in fact, had I been on the sidewalk directly out in front of their house, I would have had even a clearer, better view of what was going on. Now, that's not to say that all use of optical aids for the extension of our vision is bad. If they're out in the public and we want to zoom in on them, swimming, we can. Again, they're in the public, so we can use that zoom lens at that point. I would just, prohibit, or I would not use my zoom lens when it came to shooting that video of someone inside their house. And those laws vary. Like, I know when I took the Georgia exam, state test for private investigations, the statute says that you're not allowed to use telephotic lenses during surveillance. There's also a statute that says you can't sit next to someone in a restaurant and eavesdrop. You can't listen in on someone else's conversation to gather information. And eavesdropping is also prohibited by private investigators. My wife would never be able to be a private investigator in Georgia.
Do you always have to disclose how far you were from the subject when you were actually doing the filming?
No.
On your reports? No?
The only time I would put in any type of distance would be how far the individual walked, the claimant. Let's say if he had a bad hip and he parked on the opposite side of the parking lot when there was some closer parking because he had a nice car and he was worried about his car. I would emphasize that he was more worried about his car than his hip because there was a closer space. So I would only give assessments when it pertained to the person's actual injury. So under the invasion of privacy, we have three basic principles. We have the first being the invasion of your privacy in the backyard area or in any private area, non-public area. Like if you go into a building, you might be meeting someone in a room and you might have an expectation of privacy in that room. Now if you're meeting with the other individual and he's the one filming you, well, obviously you didn't care that you were in front of him. So the fact that he's filming it shouldn't have any bearing. You knew he was there. Now, if you're in a room, in a private room, and I stuck a camera in here, and you guys did something in this private room, that could be a gray area. That could be an area that a lawsuit may arise out of. If I left the camera in a private room, and you subsequently used that private room with someone else, thinking that no one else could see, but I left a device behind to record what you were going to do, that would be a problem.
Okay.
Now the next thing in legal issues is the notification of law enforcement that we're in an area. And this is a debatable, I feel it's debatable because it's not actually in 493. Statute 493 doesn't say that we have to. notify law enforcement. Haven't found it in there anywhere.
Okay.
However, the private investigators training manual or curriculum recommends that there be a law enforcement notification. Especially in this day and age with terrorism and things that are going on. You know, a strange car parked in a neighborhood, you might be hiding in that car. No one may know that you're there, but it still may alert someone to call the police, have the police come out, and your cover could be blown. So in those cases, you may want to call law enforcement and let them know that you're going to be in an area. Now, you know, I feel I have problems with this sometimes because I don't always notify law enforcement, especially if I'm in really small communities. Because when I call dispatch and let her know that I'm there, they might still put that information out on a radio that other people monitor. People monitor police scanners, they listen to it. You know, and you hear and you find out that the dispatcher said, oh, there's a private investigator on Main and 3rd Street, Billy Bob. He's in a green truck. And then next thing you know, everybody that drives by kind of staring at your car. Guys in pickup trucks. It's almost like the traffic increases in the area just to come by and see you. Or you call the dispatcher and it's such a small community that everybody knows each other. And you're on, you know, that Main Street or Elm or wherever you are. She knows like 2 people that live on that street. And now you're a subject of conversation between people on that street. And that kind of stuff tends to circulate through the neighborhood. And pretty soon the guy you're watching knows that you're there. So if you abide by the principle of entering the neighborhood and leaving the neighborhood without anyone knowing you were there, you won't have these problems. Now, how is it that someone notices a strange vehicle in an area? Well, that's usually something that you did wrong as an investigator. Maybe you parked on the street and there's no street parking. Whereas, if you decided to park at a local convenience store and wait for him to come off his street, you'd be successful, and no one would know you were there. So where you set up is very crucial. You know, that's one of the mistakes most investigators make right from the start. They fail to choose the proper surveillance location. So they're almost starting on the wrong foot. They're starting out incorrectly. Personally, I use driveways a lot. I'll stay away at first, make sure I have a direct view of the house, either the car or the door, because that's the first principle of surveillance is either be able to observe the car or the door. But I'll also be watching the area. And by noontime, I'll usually know whether the people that were at certain houses have already left. I see mom and dad, I see the kid walk to the bus stop, I see dad leave, and then I see mom leave. And they're dressed in business attire. I pretty much know that that's probably a house I can go over, pull into the driveway, and I'll be safe. It's risky, you know, you're pulling into someone's driveway. I pulled into a driveway only to find out about 2 hours later that grandmom's still inside. Or the garage door open and I'm parked right in front of the garage, the guy's getting ready to back out, and I'm there, and it surprises both of us. But those are the risks that I'm willing to take because I know that I have no other option in that particular neighborhood. Those are the risks I'm willing to take to maintain my high level of surveillance results. I get videotape on every single case I work. I have no excuses. I never say, you know, it was a bad day, it was a rainy day, the area was too rural, I couldn't see the house, I couldn't see the car. I don't make any of those excuses. I don't accept those excuses. I don't just drive by my subject's house once in a while to try to keep tabs on him. And you'll find this out when we do the chapter on surveillance, but I find that, you pass the subject's house one time, that's it, early in the morning, and during that early morning pass, you find out all the cars. If you have to get out and walk in and get all the tag numbers, you get all that information one time. After that, you don't pass his house anymore. But those are personal preferences. So the law enforcement notification is a personal choice. It's a recommended choice. It's recommended for your safety, for the police officers' time and effort, because if they have to come out and find out that you're a friendly when you could have called in, they get kind of upset. They might have been across town. They might have had other things that they were doing. It could be a department, maybe a medium size, and that they're tasked with multiple jobs, and that they had to stop what they were doing or wanted to do to come check out your car because the neighbors kept calling.
So a phone call to the sheriff department will do it. You don't have to actually go there in person. Okay.
Right. Now some states, in Connecticut requires you to stop in to local law enforcement and show your identification. But most, like Florida and most of the other areas, you can simply just call in and they'll ask for a description of your car, your tag number. They might ask for your private investigator's license. They most assuredly will ask for your company contact number. Because if anything goes wrong, the one thing they want to do is to be able to call your boss or your supervisor or the company you work for.
Right.
They may even want to call them to make sure that you are really who you say you are. Private investigators, we're out there. 493 says that we're out there and we have the right to investigate the identity, the conduct, the movements, the affiliations, associations, transactions, reputation, or character of any person or group of persons. That pretty much covers it. That's what our job is. So once you're out on site, there's not, and you pick an appropriate location, aside from someone's driveway. If someone comes home and asks you to get out of their driveway, obviously you need to move. That's private property. But that holds true too if you're at a convenience store parking lot. That guy could ask you to move. If you're at a school parking lot or a church, any of those private areas, people can ask you to move.
Is a convenience store private?
Yes, it's private property. It's open to the public, but if a convenience store owner owns the property, he has every right to tell you to leave, don't come back, you can't shop in his store.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm. So, you threw me off track there. So, but if you're on the street, let's say you're in Miami and you're working Calle Ocho, you're on that street, there's cars parked all up and down both sides of the street. Well, you can have every right to park there and no one really can make you move. You're on a public thoroughfare, roadway, and therefore that position's yours. You sit there, get in the best position for you to do your surveillance from. Now, if you are approached by anyone, 493 also says that you'll be guilty of a second-degree misdemeanor if you violate this section and divulge any information to anyone about what you're doing. Because remember shedding the false light? Remember the part about the privacy? Mm-hmm. If people come up to me and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" I say, "Oh, I'm watching this guy." What guy? Oh, Rubio Reyes. you're giving out information about what you're doing. Now, if you give them a fake name, that's fine, you know, if you want to go that far. I would never say that I was sitting surveillance watching somebody. First of all, they're not going to know I'm in my car, because I'm going to enter a neighborhood and leave the neighborhood without anyone knowing I was there. But if people are asking you questions, you cannot divulge any information about who you're watching or anything about your case to anyone other than the person who hired you. That means you can't, a lot of times law enforcement officers come up to you and say, yeah, I know you called in, but I've had these calls from the neighbors, you know, you're a private investigator, let me see your license. You show them your license. He says, let me see your company ID. You show them your company ID, because you have to carry both those two forms of identification. And then he says, who are you watching? You know, now, you don't want to get them mad, because that's the worst thing that can happen. So you have to find a very political way of telling him that you can't give him that information. And what I always say is, officer, you know that 493 prohibits me from divulging any information about who I'm watching or what I'm doing to anyone else other than my client. I will tell you that I'm watching someone on a block away, and it has nothing to do with any of these people in this area, so they can all, you know, relax and rest assured that I'm not targeting them. You can tell them that if I was investigating them, I'd be parked on the other street facing this way or watching this way. So in Florida, in order to do private investigations work, we have to be licensed. Now, we do have a thing called reciprocity, which means if I lived in Jacksonville and I was doing surveillance in Jacksonville, it could be very easy that my person lived in Georgia. I wouldn't know this. I might be tasked with picking him up at work. We don't know where he lives. We want to follow him home. And he drives over the Georgia border. Now, you know, I might not have a Georgia license. But Georgia would understand that my case started in Florida, and that I had no idea where I was going, and that I crossed over because I was following my subject. Now, Georgia will allow us to work, as will most states that have a reciprocal or reciprocity agreement. They will allow us to work up to 2 weeks in that state, so that we can complete our assignment and get back home and stay in the state where we're licensed. Now, while we're there in that state, let's say we're in Georgia, we decide to get a hotel room because it's now Friday night and we're going to do them on the weekend. So we're going to be in Georgia Saturday and Sunday. While I'm there, I can't say, oh, you know, good thing, I have a bunch of flyers that say, you know, John's Investigative Agency. While I'm here, I'm going to pass them around this whole city. I can't advertise in that state. I'm not licensed in that state. I'm only allowed to finish my investigation in that state and then leave the area. Once I'm done with my investigation, I need to leave. Now, trespassing. Trespassing is something completely different. You know, when I mentioned about parking in the people's driveway, you know, I'm kind of trespassing on private property. But not really, because you can't say that I'm trespassing unless you define the word, and I don't have to define trespassing. Maybe it means crossing. I don't know. I'll have to look that word up, and I will do so as a follow-up. But if trespassing means crossing, we do that all the time. Kids get off the school bus, they cut across private property, they go to their friend's house. People cut across the front of your lawn because the sidewalk maybe maybe you have a corner property. We go into convenience stores every day. We do things. People come up to your house and leave flyers on your front door. Yeah. So we do these things every single day. To say that just sitting in someone's driveway is breaking the law wouldn't be an accurate assessment or interpretation of the law. Maybe you thought that that house was for sale and you were going to wait for your realtor, but it turns out it's the house next door. And that they're in foreclosure and neither one of them had signs. And both of them had their lawn in disarray. They both looked like they were being foreclosed on. So you had no idea that anybody even lived in the house where you were sitting. Someone can't come up and immediately arrest you for that. So as private investigators, we need to take advantage of those things, of those opportunities. Now, if the person comes out and says, get off my property, well, then you need to leave. Okay, but because you have been told to leave. If you refuse to leave and he calls the police and the police come, chances are you're going to be arrested. You're already told to leave, you didn't leave. That's why you see signs that say no trespassing in wooded areas where the owner isn't relevant or isn't living right there.
Right.
He owns the property, he might live in Georgia, but he doesn't want anybody on the property. Maybe he hires it out for hunt clubs. And he doesn't want you your kid cutting across the property when he has a live hunt group out there. He doesn't want that, so he's going to tell you, don't trespass, no trespassing. Maybe he raises animals or he does something on that property that you, by crossing it, will disturb the production or whatever it is that he's doing. Again, he's going to put up no trespassing signs. This means don't cross my property. This means if you do and I catch you here, I'm going to have you arrested, or I may have you arrested. A lot of private properties, as a precaution, have signs outside that say this is private property. Now, they won't go so far as to say no trespassing, because you want to go in and visit your friend who lives there. People come in, make deliveries, all kinds of stuff happens. But they put they notify you that it's private trespass. And that they might say no soliciting, correct? They might tell you that you are to be here only for official business, which is kind of our way of getting in, our way. We're here on official business. But at the same time, if they tell us to leave, we have to leave. We have no choice. To be completely honest, there's high-rise communities that we're going to work as private investigators all the time. And for you to say, well, that's private property, I can't go on there, you won't get your job done. If you go up to the gate and you give him a line, you give him what we call a pretext, a kind of a false statement of who you are or why you're really there, and he lets you in, you're good to go until you're asked to leave. A lot of communities have golf courses and they're open to the public. Even private neighborhoods and private golf courses will still offer golf lessons. So if you go up and you can't say, hey, I'm going to go play golf, the guy goes, it's private. A better pretext, you have to make sure that you know what's going on. You just say, hey, I'm coming up, or I'm going to purchase something from the golf course, an article of clothing for a father-in-law who played this course only one time, he loved it. Can I get a pass just to go to the clubhouse? Or I'm coming here for lessons? Or I'm looking at a piece of property. Maybe that particular neighborhood has on-site sales or information location. Something to get you inside that complex. Are you being completely honest? No. But, is an FBI agent that goes undercover with a biker gang, is he completely honest and tell the biker guys when they're all sitting around? He says, hey, I'm an FBI agent, I'm investigating you guys. Of course not. They would hang him out to dry right then and there. That's why we have undercover detectives. And we have undercover detectives in every industry, not just for the government. We have undercover private investigators that work for trucking companies. that work on the loading docks to try to figure out who's stealing from the shipping companies. So we go undercover all the time. If you're running your own business, you have to go undercover. You might have to get aggressive and dress in all camouflage clothing and go into a wood line and see, maybe get a better position, not necessarily of his backyard that he has an expectation of privacy, but maybe the front of his house, where anybody driving by can clearly see him. But the problem is that if you stop, he immediately stops what he's doing and he walks out to find out what you're doing, stopping in front of stopping in front of his house. Whereas if you're in the wood line and you're watching the front of his house, different story. So I'm not encouraging you to get in a wood line behind someone's house.
Right.
But I'm telling you that you might have to get aggressive. You might have to, trespass, cross someone's personal property. But of course then, if I'm in some wood line between two properties and it's not posted, how do I know who owns that? Is this my subject's wooded area, or is it the person next door's wooded area?
Right.
I'm going to probably take my position in there and wait for someone to say, hey, you're on my property, please leave. A grumpy neighbor cannot ask you to leave his neighborhood. He doesn't own the neighborhood. Now, a grumpy neighbor who lives within a gated community probably could find a way to make you leave. If he finds out that you're not there visiting anybody and no one knows you're there and you got in surreptitiously or without anyone's knowledge. But if you're in a public neighborhood, that's a different story. No one can make you leave. Now, how do you gauge whether it's public or private, the neighborhood?
Well, if it doesn't have a gate.
Yeah. If it has a gate, it's typically a private community. Mm-hmm. Not always, but typically a gated community. They might have a gate, but they might have a policy to let everybody in. You just don't know it.
Right. Because
the roads within there are maintained by the county. If the roads are maintained by the county within a neighborhood, it's public. Trespassing is usually not a problem or an issue if you use good judgment. I can honestly say that in my 30 years, I have never been cited for trespass. I've been asked to leave a lot of times, but I have never been arrested or cited for trespass. Another very important area that I wanted to talk about was the falsification of reports. When we as investigators, when we write a report, that report is being used, could affect someone's livelihood, could affect someone's quality of life. If you're working a child custody case and you're going to show that one parent shouldn't have custody of that child, that's going to affect that person's quality of life, not being able to have access to his or her child. So, our reports are meaningful. When a judge gets an investigative report, he's looking at it that an independent person looked at this, someone that doesn't have any interest in that case, and this is the report that he or she created. He has to give that report considerable weight, value. It has to mean something. If you're fighting with your husband and you write up all the reasons why he shouldn't be allowed to have the child, he's going to write the same list about you, and the judge is going to look at them and they're both going to be he said, she said. Whereas the private investigator who maybe took a look at both of you, and they have these court ad litem's part of the court where they look at both parents and they do a report for the judge and he takes a look at them. Well, that person would be an independent study of both individuals. Well, the private investigator or our investigative report is kind of the same thing. It can be used the same way. It can be one-sided too. It could be you hiring me just to address him. And the judge would say, well, have you hired a private investigator to investigate her? If he didn't, he could have, but he didn't take that advantage. Now, so we take an investigative agency owner like myself will take that report very serious. I want to make sure that my investigator is doing everything he should be and nothing that he shouldn't be. And one of the most crucial things that he could ever do in that report would be to lie. Now there's these little white lies, these little tiny lies that, that some people will justify and say aren't really lies. Because we're supposed to go out and do surveillance, let's say, for 8 hours. Let's say we didn't get up as early as we wanted to, and we got there at 11. But we don't want our boss to know that because we were supposed to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we lie and we say we got there at 6. And between 6 to 11, we observed no activity.
That's not a white lie.
Yeah.
That's a big lie.
That's a big lie. We call that ghosting. We call that people writing in when they weren't really there. And some investigators become very good at it, and it's hard to spot. And it takes a while before you realize that you have a problem with an investigator. I'll look and I'll see that, this investigator always gets video in the afternoons. Never gets any video in the morning. Or this investigator gets only video in the morning and none in the afternoon. Maybe he's an early person. He likes getting up early in the morning. He goes, he gets his video, and then he says, I'm done here, and he leaves. And he says he stayed till 3 o'clock, his 8-hour shift, when he left at 12. Aside from the obvious problem with this, is that the individual may have activity that he did in the afternoon. He may even have a doctor's appointment that the client knows about. They might have set up a physical therapy appointment for him at 2:30. And for your investigator to say he sat there from 12 to 3 and nothing happened, and the client knows that he went to physical therapy at 2:30 makes my agency look horrible.
Embarrassing.
Very embarrassing. So it has gotten to the point where some clients will ask the investigator to take some video every hour on the hour from where he is. But that's like putting a Band-Aid on a dam crack, or putting some bubble gum in a hole in a dam. The problem is investigators, if they're going to lie, or if that's within their nature, they're going to find a way around it.
Yeah.
They're going to change the hour on their video camera, and they're going to take video every hour up till 3, and they're going to turn it in. So clients that ask you to do that, it's almost like they don't trust the investigative company that they're asking to work for them. And for me, that's kind of like an insult.
Right.
And I would say, don't use me. If you think you need for me to take a video every hour on the hour, then don't use me. Use someone else that you trust wholeheartedly. I don't take video every hour on the hour, but I know a lot of companies that do. I've worked for companies as a subcontractor who asked me to take video every hour on the hour, and I've done that. So I had a guy that was shooting video only in the afternoons, not in the mornings. So I had a feeling that he probably wasn't on site early in the morning. So I did what any reputable owner would do. I put another investigator on his house, on the investigator's house. I said I want a camera on his house running every minute. I want to see everything that happens at that house. So cameras on the house, starts at 6 a.m. At 9 o'clock, the investigator comes out with his wife and their child. The subject leaves. I told him, don't move. Don't follow him. Don't stay on the house. I said, if he's with his wife and his child, he's probably going to drop them off. He might go to work. He might come back. takes his wife to work. She works at the Florida Mall. She's a hairdresser. Everybody knew that. He comes back to the house. It's now 9:30, 10 o'clock. Now he's gathering up his gear and he's putting it in the car. He leaves the house at about 10:37. Probably got to his Lakeland surveillance that he had that day about 11:30. I waited for that report to come in. The report came in and says he got on site at 6 a.m. and he worked until 3. On that particular day, he didn't get any video of the subject, although the subject was home the whole day. I have no idea whether the subject was really home or not. I only know that his report and the videotape that I got from my other investigator didn't match. I asked the investigator to write up his own report about what he was asked to do and what his results were. I took both reports and I sent them to the Florida Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services, and I asked for them to sanction this investigator that I was terminating him. They subsequently revoked his license. The individual moved to South Carolina and secured his own detective agency in South Carolina and is in operation today.
So you can do that even if one state revokes your license, you can get a license in another state?
You shouldn't, because that other state asks you typically, has your license ever been revoked?
Okay, so he lied.
Maybe he lied. I don't know. Maybe he told them the truth. Maybe they felt that it was a one incident and that you deserve a second chance. I don't know. Couldn't tell you what happened. So your reports do matter. They make a great impact. They need to be accurate. Misrepresentation of authority. One of the reasons why I've never carried a badge is because I didn't want anybody to ever say, he told me he was a police officer, or he showed me a badge. Because impersonating a police officer is the worst thing we could be charged with. That's a felony. So I have just never had the need to have a badge. I have found it easier for me to just go talk to people. A badge kind of puts you in a place of authority to where you're almost like demanding information of the person. And I feel that it's almost counterproductive. I can do better going out and relating to them, like I'm going to move into their neighborhood. I want to find out what the school system's like, who cuts their grass. He does a really good job. I'd like to, hire the same type of person, and ask those types of questions. It'll keep me in front of them longer. It will get them talking, and we'll actually have a friendly conversation. Whereas if I have a badge, you might be in the middle of cooking. You might not want to answer a bunch of questions. Your answers might be short. They might, they just might not have you might not give anything thought, Whereas a neighbor comes up, someone new, you might find more time for them. You might run in and say, you know what, let me turn that boiling water off for a second. Or come on inside. Invite me inside. Give me a drink. We sit down, we talk while you're, boiling your noodles. You never know what's going to happen. You get a lot more information. So I avoid trying to act as if I am a police officer or carry a badge in any respect. And that also goes towards carrying a weapon. I had an incident where an employee had a license to carry a weapon and always carried one. He even had a concealed weapon to carry it when he was off duty. But he got into an incident in Miami where the person that he was following knew that he was being followed. And he ended up calling the police while he was being followed and saying that there's a guy following me and he pulled a gun on me and pointed it at me. So the police respond. They have to respond. They stop both parties and they ask the investigator, do you have a gun in the car? And he does. So now the police are faced with two statements. One guy saying he never did that, but he had a gun in the car. The other guy, how did he know he had a gun?
Right.
Unless he saw it. So the police don't have anything else to do but to charge you and let you explain or get an attorney so that you can argue this in court, because they have no way of resolving it. All they can do is to say, this is what this guy said. He knew that there was a gun in the car, so obviously he must have seen it, but maybe he says that all the time. Maybe he figures all private investigators carry guns. So I'm just gonna say he pointed a gun at me. So now you're as a private investigator, you're stuck in a position of defending yourself, maybe having to get an attorney to prove that you're innocent, if you even can. So why not just leave it at home?
It's a double-edged blade.
Yeah, exactly. Why even have it with you? It's just going to cause problems. You don't need it. We don't pull guns out and arrest people. 30 years, no gun. No instance where I needed a gun to protect myself. Why? Well, because I'm entering the neighborhood and leaving. No one even knows I'm there. I've worked Liberty City. I have worked, all of, Crime Hills. I have worked all the different communities and found a way to avoid any type of confrontation. And that's what you need to do. So we talked about invasion of privacy and how you can't shed a false light on someone. You also need to know that, we have rules and regulations about the release of information. Your report has to go to your client and your client only. That's called dissemination of information. Disseminating it, putting it out there. You might be working for a private client that says, my husband did this, and this. I need you to find those records. And you find those records for her and you give them to her, and she makes copies of them and passes them out to the whole neighborhood. Now, you didn't do it, but she did. Well, it might be that you're asked as the investigator, did you tell her not to disseminate this information? Did you advise her not to do certain things? When we run a criminal history check on an individual with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is something anyone can do, if you can go right on their site, pay $25 or $24 and run a criminal history check. When that criminal history check comes to you, it says right on the bottom, this information shall not be disseminated to any third person. Well, you need to do the same in your reports. If you have derogatory information and you're working for the public who may not understand how this information can negatively affect someone, you need to let them know, put it in writing. Listen, this is a confidential report prepared for you in anticipation of your litigation on child custody or child support, and that this information should not be disseminated to any third party, like anyone else. That woman, she might take the disparaging information that you provided her, make copies of it, and send it to the guy's boss, and then he gets fired. Now we have a big problem, and you don't want to be a part of that. But yet, here we are. We're private investigators. We were hired by the public. We just did what she asked us to do. There wasn't anything illegal what we did, and now we're caught up in this firestorm. But this is not unusual. It happens to private investigators all the time. When I first went to Miami, my territory was Miami and the Keys, and I loved life. I was 21 years old, and I covered from Miami to the Keys. First of all, I was in Little Cuba most of the time, and then from there I went to Jimmy Buffett's Tropical Paradise, the Keys. Wow. So I had the best of both worlds. All those good-looking Cuban girls, the Cuban coffee in the morning, the little croquetas that I used to eat, the ham croquetas in the morning. I loved it. I was traveling every day. I was in a different country.
Wow.
It was Cuba. And then I would go to Tropical Paradise, and I worked all the different keys. I loved the fish. I loved the boat. It was perfect for me. And I forgot why I was telling you that whole story. have to cut it here. We'll come back.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Stop it. Let me keep
I
my.
think you were saying that because you said that happens to everybody, that you do something.
Oh yeah.
Just
I know why.
push it then?
No, let it go.
What is that?
That's a train going by.
Oh. That you said that it happened to a lot of people, that you do some
I got
report for someone.
Yeah. This is a continuation of the legal issues and investigations. I left off by saying that I had been an investigator for my territory was Miami and the Keys, and I really enjoyed it. Well, when I first started, I was sitting surveillance. I was in a VW Scirocco, and I had my seat all the way back. I was sitting in the front seat. I had a big lens on my still camera because we didn't have video back then. So I would bring up my still camera. If I saw something, I'd take a picture, and then I would know I'd need to move in, get out my 16 millimeter motion picture film, and actually crank it up and film them. Well, as I was sitting there in my Scirocco, I saw this guy come out of the house. Didn't think anything of it because I'm about 2 blocks away from my target. And he walks up to the side of my car, and boom, puts a gun to the side of my head. Welcome to Miami. Well, I was 21, 22 years old. This was my first encounter. There wasn't anything I could have done to protect myself. If I had a gun, we'd probably both be dead. Well, that individual then went through my briefcase, asked me what I was doing, and it turns out that he was a drug enforcement agent and I was on his street. And every time he saw that camera go up, he thought that it was like a bazooka, that I was going to firebomb his house. Well, the things that I didn't understand was that in the early 1980s, Miami that was faced with an interdiction of drugs like crazy. They had a lot of problems. And the individual who lived on that street, he was actually a partner to a U.S. Customs agent that was kidnapped, taken to Mexico, and tortured. Oh, wow. So he was on a leave of duty. He was not working, and he was at home, and he was a little unstable. Also at that time, the narco terrorists, the drug key kingpins, were hiring private investigators. The private investigators didn't know who their client was. The client would just get a private investigator and say, listen, I'm being involved in a business transaction with this guy. I know he works in this building. I'd like you to pick him up after he comes out of the building, follow him around, find out where he does, find out where he lives. Well, the private investigator didn't know that unmarked building that he was following an individual out of was a DEA off-site location, unmarked. And the private investigator was actually identifying everybody that came out of there and where they lived. And that way, the drug lords could target those guys. They could firebomb them out, they could kidnap them, they could kill them. The same thing happened in California. A private investigator was hired to locate this individual. Well, the individual turned out to be a budding actress. She wasn't really well known, and then she was subsequently, I believe she was killed by, a fan that just, I don't know, he had been trying to date her, and he had been trying to contact her, and she had refused him or turned down. So he wanted to find out where she lived, and he wanted to enact his revenge on her. So we need to know, who are our clients? What do they want? Is what they tell us what they wanted, is that true? I have a good friend, has an agency in New Jersey, and the guy turned up dead in his apartment building. And the suspect's house, once they found the suspect, they found a copy of my buddy's report, investigative report. he had been hired by this individual to find the other individual so that he could enact his revenge on him. So, and when my friend was questioned by the police, you know, he always had, and was very smart, he would have a work order. And when he worked with a private individual, he had a paragraph that said on there, you know, like, if I'm going to locate this individual, it can't be for, you can't have any type of restraint against contact with that individual, and that it has to be for completely lawful purposes. And then he actually asked them to write in for what purpose and sign it. So the person would have to state, you know, was an old friend from high school, I'm just trying to find him, and sign it. That way he protected himself.
Right.
So unfortunately, that's what we need to do. You need to have an assignment sheet. You need to ask the person for what reason are you trying to find their ex-spouse or a certain individual, and have them maybe actually tell you or put it in their own writing the reason and sign it to protect yourself. Now, proper release of information also covers when you're doing a legitimate investigation, it's a requirement of you to get a copy of your report to your client. You know, some people want to go out and they want to collect the money for the investigation, do the investigation, call their client and give them the information, and then not do the report part. You know, the reporting part can be very time consuming. It can take you a whole day to do a report. I worked a report last week that covered a week assignment. It was 100 pages long. I not only worked it all week while I was doing the case, did the report, it also took 3 more days after the case was done to put all the material together in a 100-page report. So it's a requirement of you to get a report to your client, not just bill them and take their money. At some point, someone might contact you, one of your clients might contact you and legitimately ask for another copy of the report, or ask for you for copies of the videotape evidence. Again, these would be permissible releases of information to your client. A court might ask you to appear and bring with you copies of your report and your evidence. That would usually be through a subpoena. A witness subpoena where you're having to come to court. Now, if you're going to enter that evidence at the time of the hearing, enter it into evidence, you might be required to submit also a chain of custody or chain of evidence showing who had control of that evidence, where it's been, to make sure that it hasn't been altered or doctored in any way. So a chain of custody letter, usually if you're getting ready to go to a hearing and your office manager gets all the video, your original video out of the evidence locker, he gives it all to you, he would probably also give you a chain of evidence that will say, on such and such a date you worked the case. You brought that evidence to the office gave it a number when they usually got your report and they build it out. When they build it out, they got a number, they put it on the evidence, and they put it in their evidence locker. Now that you need it on such and such a date, you got a subpoena to have to appear to testify at the hearing. They pulled the evidence out of the evidence room, gave it to you. So we know that chain of evidence. It came from you, went to a custodian in the office, who logged it in and put it in the evidence locker. That custodian then took it out of the locker, gave it back to you to take to court. It hasn't been in anyone else's hands. Do you see how that's important?
Yes.
Yeah. Because, you know, we're talking about video, but it could be anything, any type of evidence. You don't want a piece of evidence just being left outside where someone else could do something to it. They could take some of your saliva and put it on the end of a cigarette butt and say, oh yeah, she was smoking this cigarette. Look, check the cigarette, it has their saliva on it. You know, so we're very particular about controlling evidence. You know, it has an impact on people's lives. So we need to make sure. That will conclude this chapter on legal issues. Thank you. Yeah, okay. I have to go to the bathroom. Gosh. How long was that? Half hour? 45 minutes?
Just push it again.
Yeah. All right, we'll be covering Chapter 6, Locate Investigations. When starting a locate investigation, it's important to go through some basic or preliminary steps to ensure you are starting out on the right foot. This will include verification of certain types of information. It's very important to start with the correct name and address in a locate investigation. Now, we're going to get our information from our client, and depending on how close the client is to the individual that we're looking for, they might not know him personally. Like in a corporate investigation, the person that gives you the assignment may be someone in a corporate office, and they understand that one of their former employees used to be a witness, or was a witness to an accident. But the accident occurred 5 years ago, and now they're trying to find that former employee who's no longer with the company. They may or not be, personally familiar with the subject. If it's a really big company, they might not know a lot about them. But somebody will. Usually the other co-workers that maybe work at the job location where he used to be. The supervisor there might know him very well. They might know his family. His children might have played with the employees' children if they were the same age. So you always want to make sure that you can go to the actual location where the worker used to work and ask questions there to make sure that you have some correct information. One of those would be the spelling of the person's name. Rodriguez is spelled a couple of different ways, sometimes with an S, sometimes with a Z. If the person is not at all known to the employer, maybe was a vendor or someone else, and they're just looking at some notes and saying, well, the person's name was, Maria Arecido. Well, the spelling of that might be like a THO on the end instead of a DO, the way the Spanish pronounce a D with a TH. Or it could even be a V on the end. They might have spelled the person's name phonetically. Well, you need to know that, because that might tell you, hey, before you start this investigation, you need to do research just on the person's name. And that might require finding out who that person worked for, what vendor company they came on their premises, and then start your investigation from their place of employment to double check on the employee's name. Another thing that we can do with all the databases that we have today, we can run a person's address, and it'll show you us all the people that used to live at that address. A lot of that information comes from the credit reporting agencies. It may come from the Department of Motor Vehicles, but it's a collaborative of information that is put together by a database company. One of the database companies used a lot by investigators is called IRB, out of Tallahassee, Florida. The insurance industry, and me as an SIU investigator, I use a company called Nexus Lexus, what's available to the insurance industry. I will plug in the person's name or their address, and it'll show me all the possibilities. If it's an address, it'll show me everybody that lived there, and I can look for a name that's similar to what everybody told me the witness's name was. And once I find that name, I then do a completely different search called a name search and just run that name. Now I'm looking for their current address, their social security number, date of birth, all things that I can later use during my investigation. Once I find the subject, I can say, did you ever deliver products to a company called Claims Resource? And if they say yes, I can ask, when was that? Who were you employed with at the time? And they tell me, and all the information matches up, I know I have the right subject, and I can proceed with whatever it is I need to do. Take their statement, maybe do an informal interview, find out what they know, get all their contact information, and have our attorney get a hold of his or her attorney. So the very first thing you need to do in a locate investigation is make sure that you're starting with correct information. Locate investigations are also commonly referred to as skip tracing. And what that refers to is that sometimes people would have an obligation. They could have their rent, they could have a merchant account, like a Sears credit card or something, and they end up not paying their bill. They skip out on their bill. So that's where the word skip came from. And of course, trace is trying to trace their whereabouts today. Now, one of the most important things to know about a locate investigation is that many times the information that you're going to need to locate the subject is right in front of you, or it's within the paperwork that you were either given or gathered in preparation to start the locate investigation. An experienced investigator will put all the information he or she has together, review the information before doing anything. There may be a telephone number there. You would be amazed at how many times I got an investigation where it says, please locate this individual. And when I looked through the paperwork, there was a telephone number, I called it, and it was the person's cellular phone number. It was that simple. An investigation is a collection of facts in order to reach a conclusion. That's what an investigation is. These facts by themselves don't indicate much. It's kind of like the pieces of a puzzle. When they're all spread out, it doesn't mean that much. But when you put it together, it paints a picture. And from that picture, you will be able to draw a conclusion. The main question in a locate investigation is, where does the subject currently live? Or how can I locate the individual right now? Where can I find that individual? A locate might take you to the person's place of employment. A locate investigation might take you to their house. Doesn't matter. As long as you locate them and know where they are, where they can be found, that can constitute a completed locate investigation. There are those who will discount and even discard pieces of information, thinking that they're not of any value. That would be like taking one piece of that puzzle and saying, well, I don't really need this. These people have the notion that if a piece of information does not lead directly to the subject, then the information is irrelevant. Again, not true. If you're trying to paint a picture of what the subject looks like and you're missing that piece could be a nose, it could be an eye, and you're not going to be able to make the determination. In a locate investigation, you never know what piece or combination of information is going to lead to the current location of someone until after the fact. Thus, all information is important from the start. Don't disregard any piece of information. For example, you may go into a neighborhood and talk to one neighbor who may state at the onset of the conversation, I know nothing about the subject. We weren't friends. He lived next door, that was it. Well, don't leave. Try to keep the conversation going, because what that neighbor may think is important or may think is not important, don't let him be the judge of that. Try to get as much information out of him as you can, because these are the little pieces of the puzzle that you're trying to gather. That neighbor doesn't know what you know, so he doesn't know what pieces you have. Maybe he can fill in for what pieces he has. So ask him a few more questions. When did the subject move? Does he know? Maybe he doesn't know him that well, but he knew, what type of cars did they have parked in the driveway? Did they own or rent the house? Do they know where he worked or where the wife worked? Where the kids went to school? What type of hobbies the kids had? You know, the guy might say, well, I don't know him at all, but oh yeah, his son plays Little League Baseball in Apopka with my son. So if it's baseball season, you might get lucky. Find out when Little League is. Find out how you can find out the rosters of all the Little League teams and look for a child on a team with the same last name. A lot of these Little Leagues even have their rosters online, so it's something that you can do from the house. I had a case where I was told by a client that they wanted 3 days of surveillance, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, on an individual to see what his activities consisted of. They told me that he would probably be very active because he had his children this weekend. He was divorced. He had custody of his kids that weekend. And they further told me that he'd probably be active because the son had a Little League game and that he was on the team, the Yankees. So I went to the house and I was sitting surveillance, and it was a heavily populated area. It was a tough sit. I couldn't have direct observation of the house. I had to sit at the end of the street and wait for the car to come out. And as I was sitting there, I kept thinking to myself, what can I do to be better prepared for this investigation? I was going on my phone, online on my phone, and I was checking for Little League. And I found that it was online and that the Brevard County Little League, the fields were like 1 mile away, and it had all the rosters. And I was going through all the rosters, and I looked, there was the Yankees. I looked at the Yankees roster, but the kid's name wasn't on there. And I kept saying to myself, you know, that doesn't make sense. They told me the game was at 11:30 on Saturday morning, and so I had plenty of time in the morning. I got there at 7. Weekend surveillances start at 7. During the week, you start them at 6. So I went online to the Brevard County Circuit Court, and I queried my guy's last name. And I found that he had been divorced twice. Right now he was single because he had just been divorced like a year earlier. But if the kid was in Little League, he's probably about 9, 8, 9, 10. So that ex-wife they wouldn't have had a child old enough to be in Little League. So it must have been the wife before. So I found that wife that he had been divorced from for 10, 12 years, and I found her name. So then I put her name in. I went to the tax roll records, which shows you property owned by individuals. I checked his most recent wife, and she didn't own any property in the area. I checked the older wife, the one that would have had a child, maybe 9, 10 years old, and found out that she did own property. But it was in Titusville, almost an hour away from where we were. So I started thinking to myself, if his kids are visiting him for the weekend, and the little boy's in Little League, he's probably not in Little League where his dad lives. He's probably in Little League where he lives in Titusville. So I went online and found that Titusville had its own, even though it was Brevard County, it still had its own separate Little League. Just like Celebration, where I live. Celebration has Celebration Little League, Kissimmee has a Little League, but yet Celebration's in Kissimmee. So I found that the Titusville Little League had a team called the Yankees, and the Yankees had a game at 11:30 on Saturday morning. I checked the roster, his name was there. That field was an hour away from where I was. Now, I was prepared originally that if I didn't pick up the father coming out that driveway and would have missed him, I was going to go to the local Little League. And I would have been there, and he never would have showed up because he was going to drive an hour north. Another thing that told me was that he was going to have to leave early because he's got a further drive than what I expected. So I should start to, pay particular attention to that roadway at about 10 o'clock. Well, another thing that I found on the website was that the little boy's dad was listed as the coach of the team. Another thing that I had not expected and was not told. But having all that information, now I knew that he probably wasn't going to leave at 10. He'd probably even leave earlier because the coach of the team has a lot more responsibilities other than just getting there, showing up, and coaching. A lot of times you might have to do the line, you might have to unpack all the gear and everything. Well, sure enough, at 9:30 he left, and he drove to Titusville, and I followed him. So never be comfortable in any circumstance, whether you're doing a locate, a surveillance. Your mind has to be busy. You always have to be busy thinking, what if, what else, what information can I find out about? And since we have access to the internet on our smartphones, it's a perfect tool for while you're sitting there to do these queries. You know, there was a time when I first started that we didn't have the internet. I know, I'm only 25 years old, but it's hard to believe. But, you know, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have comprehensive database reports where we could put in a subject's name. We had to do everything the hard way. So I'm kind of old school thinking like that. When I'm out there sitting, normally I would have went to the county courthouse and did all those records checked by hand. Maybe did them the day before, but now I can do it in my car that morning. But having such a familiarity with the courthouse, having been there in person in my early years and going through all the records, I know it's available. I know that you can go online and search a person's name and find out whether they were a defendant or a plaintiff in a civil case. I also know that you can go onto the county tax roll records and look for their property tax records, what they're paying tax on. So I know that those tools are there. Now that we have the internet, it just makes it more convenient for us. So when you go into a neighborhood, talk to as many neighbors as you can. Pick apart or pick pieces of information that everybody tells you. I have a good example of this. Suppose a neighbor states that he doesn't know the individual, didn't know much about him, even though he lived next door to him for 5 years. About the only thing he knew is that the guy had a landscape business. He knows this because he remembers the landscape trailer always being in the yard. The guy would leave in a white pickup truck, take his trailer out, come home, covered with grass and green stains and stuff. So he knew he had a landscape business. But that was about it. He didn't have any kids the same age. They didn't appear to have anything in common. And that's about the only information that he felt was pertinent. So then I go to the next neighbor, and the next neighbor tells me, well, no, I wish I could help you, but I really don't know anything about the individual. He said, one time I remember I ran into him at a Home Depot in Fort Lauderdale, and I said, what are you doing in Fort Lauderdale? And he said, well, I work in Fort Lauderdale. So I took that piece of the puzzle with me. The next neighbor I contacted, again, gave me the same spiel. He said, listen, I don't know the guy. He lived over there. He pretty much kept to himself. About the only thing I know is that he worked for some company called Tropical. I wish I could help you more, but that's all I could tell you. Well, if I put those three pieces of information, I could surmise that he was in a landscape business, possibly called Tropical, located in Fort Lauderdale. Well, when I checked with directory assistance or a telephone book back then, because I didn't have the internet, I found that there was a company called Tropical Landscape in Fort Lauderdale. And when I made a call to that location, inquiring about my subject, they verified that he did in fact work there. So, again, don't discount any information. Don't leave when someone says that they don't know the subject or don't have any information helpful. You are the ones that need to be the determining factor in what information is important. Gather everything together. Don't disregard any one piece. Now, obviously, in a locate investigation, it's not possible for me to itemize every single step that should be taken. The most thing to remember is to be thorough in your questioning of sources. Anytime a person is giving you their time, a neighbor or anybody that you talk to, draw it out as long as you can. Try to build up a little bit of a rapport with them so that you can stay in front of them as long as possible and ask as many questions as they'll allow you to ask. The most important thing is to be thorough in all your questioning. If you've done it for a while, you start learning what's important. You start learning when you talk to a neighbor that says, I don't know them, you start asking them about the cars, about their children, about who owns the house. Because those pieces of information, they might know that the guy was a renter. So now you can look for a landlord. The landlord's going to have information on the subject. He didn't rent his house to some guy that he knew nothing about. He rented his house to a guy who he verified employment with. He probably gets a check for rent. Probably knows what bank he uses. He knows where the wife works. He knows where the kids go to school. He might even have a pet deposit that the person has a pet. He might have a telephone number of a person to contact in case of an emergency. They might have a lot of information. So you need to make sure that you are thorough in your questioning and get used to covering all the information with the people that you feel is going to be helpful in your investigation. It's important to follow your leads and conduct the locate investigation as fast as possible. If there's too much time between the steps that you take, the person might move again. I had an individual that he lived in Fort Myers. I got a lead that he was living in Orlando. I came to Orlando, I sat surveillance, and I found that he wasn't there anymore. I checked the records for him and it said, yeah, he lived in Orlando. I checked the records for his wife. It says, yes, she lived in Orlando. I checked the records for the daughter and it said she lived in Florida, or she lived in Tallahassee. She was an FSU student. I checked the records for the son. He was only 18 years old, so he didn't have a very good database of paper trail of any sort. But at 18 years old, I thought to myself, Facebook. So I went on Facebook and found out that he had gone to Harmony High School, which is in Central Florida here. And from Harmony, he then went to Lake Nona High School. Lake Nona High School was, in fact, the high school where I was doing my most recent investigation from, but I knew he wasn't there any longer. I also knew that the dad had spent most of his adult life in Fort Myers. He was a businessman down there. He had a car rental, a car sales business. You know what case I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Don't mention the name. So I knew he didn't live in Orlando anymore. So I started checking the son out a little bit more, and I found out that the son had recently been arrested. We had been arrested in 2008 for breaking into an occupied residence. But his hearings didn't come about until just this past June. So in the June document, his arrest record, it indicated that his current verified address was in Fort Myers, Florida. His Facebook also indicated that he had graduated from Lake Nona High School. He played soccer on the soccer team, and that he was headed to FSU to be a freshman this year. So I told my client I needed to go to Fort Myers and to check that address. And lo and behold, that's where I found my subject, in Fort Myers, back in his old stomping grounds. Now, I'm going to go ahead and list some steps that are part of what I consider a scientific methodology of investigation. Pay special attention to this section and review this lesson on how to conduct a step-by-step locate investigation on your own. It's not uncommon for an investigator to have a checklist or to have an outline on how to do a certain type of case. I've been doing it for 30 years. I have a manual of all the different types of cases that I've done over the years, and I have outlines. I have an outline based on just statements, the type of statements I'll take. If it's an auto theft case, I have a statement for auto thefts. If it's a slip and fall in a grocery store, I have a statement of questions for that type of case. If it's an automobile accident, I have a statement outline. If it's a workers' compensation claim, I have a statement outline. I have a statement outline for a heart attack on the job, for a head injury on the job, for a lower back injury on the job. So, and I've put those statements, they're a collaboration of outlines that I've just accumulated over the years, and now it's about a 100-page document. Remember that a professional investigator can find anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. What matters is the amount of time that you have and the resources that you have. First of all, we're not trying to find bin Laden. We don't have to find him. He's dead. But, what's that?
I think so.
Bin Laden? We killed him. Oh, yes, I do think so. But you know what? Those are not the type of people that we're usually trying to find. We're trying to find average Joes living an average life. Sure, some of them, might be harder to find than others, but they're usually not America's most wanted. They're just ordinary people. So, your only limitations are realistically your time, money, and your imagination. If I had to find you, and I had unlimited resources, and I took your picture, and I put it on every news station across the country, I guarantee I'm going to get calls and leads to follow up on. Now, do we have those resources? Probably not. I had a case where an individual had bought a pair of bike shorts in a Walmart. He was a biking enthusiast. He was riding that bike, came down around a corner, the bike slipped out, and he slid across the pavement. The shorts were made of such a synthetic material that friction sliding caused them to catch fire. The biker fell and had third-degree burns over about 70% of his body. Major case. The law firm contacted our company, and of course they contacted me, because I was the type of individual that always liked to work the complex investigations. I was the type of person that grew up in a family-run business. I'd have to wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock. I worked in a cooler. Our family had a meat market. We had a deli, and we butchered steers, and we had an old-fashioned meat market in Philadelphia. I know what it takes to sacrifice yourself for your client or your industry. I grew up that way. I don't know any other way to do things. So if you give me a case and you give me unlimited resources, I'm going to use them. And I'm going to use them to the point where, in most cases, I'm going to be successful in getting the information that you need. Again, my limitations are time, money, and my own imagination. Now, the company that hired us gave me a $30,000 budget to find these shorts. And the attorneys that I met with, a very astute law firm that was representing Walmart, they came to me and they said, in our very first meeting, they said, we want ads in every major newspaper throughout the United States. Or, pick your market, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. We want to go where there's the most people that are going to see that ad. So I started that case, and I was looking over the information, and I was making the calls about advertising and working with someone to put together how we were going to word this ad. We wanted someone to come forth with these pair of shorts that bought them in Walmart, because Walmart says that they hadn't had those shorts, or they hadn't made them, or they weren't sure what brand they were, because there was nothing to go on other than, I think, a tag or a small portion of the shorts. There was no receipt by the family. There was nothing that they could give us to really substantiate their claim. And it burned. And we really wanted to find these. We wanted to find out, was this a problem? Because this is what we call a subrogation investigation. We would attempt to find these shorts. If they were flammable and did represent a potential hazard to the community, we might go to the manufacturer of those shorts and say, hey, you sold us something that was dangerous and you should have known. Like, we don't know what all the chemical byproducts that went to make that piece of material. We just don't know all that. It might just say synthetic, 100% man-made. You don't know what it is. So you're assuming that a manufacturer of a clothing article would make certain that it wasn't highly flammable. But in this case, apparently it was. So we really needed to find these shorts. So based on a description and a drawing, we set forth to try to put out an advertisement. Now keep in mind, I'm going back about 15 years, so my memory's not completely, I'm not going to remember every single fact of this case. But I do know that as I started the investigation, I found that there was no Walmart in New York City at the time these shorts were allegedly purchased. There was no Walmart in Philadelphia at the time these shorts were allegedly purchased. In fact, our whole concept was wrong. Walmart didn't go into major cities. Walmart opened up in very rural, small town communities where people would buy everything from Walmart. From their food, their groceries, all their staple items. They bought everything there. Walmart didn't go into major cities. So what we found out, first of all, was that we couldn't advertise in all the major cities. We'd have to find the smallest towns where people bought everything at Walmart and where the stores were at that time. So we asked Walmart for a demographic of when they built their stores throughout the United States around that period of time. And that confirmed our suspicions. Around that period of time, Walmart was in some isolated, very rural communities, and those were the communities that we targeted. We set up a database, or a call bank of a telephone number staffed with people to call. We outsourced that. And we got thousands of calls. And we got potentially hundreds of pairs of shorts. And I think we narrowed it down to about 3 possibilities. And from those 3 possibilities, the attorneys took it from there. But we found those shorts, or what we felt was a strong probability that we found those shorts. And from there, they would go to a chemical engineering company. They would determine the composition of those shorts. Those shorts would also then be tracked by Walmart, because Walmart would now know they'd have the SKU number and everything else that they needed in-house. They didn't need our help for that, to find those shorts. So again, not only locating a subject or a witness, now we're locating a pair of shorts. So you think to yourself, you could be locating just about anything. And again, your only limitations are your money,
time, and
your own imagination. And cases are all like that. Your imagination plays such an important role in an investigation. You have to put yourself in that situation and say, what would I do? If you're doing a surveillance on a painter, what would I do? What would I need? Somebody said to me, we need to prove that this guy's painting houses. Okay? Well, we could go there and take pictures of his equipment at the end of the night if he has a trailer with a ladder on top. We could contact, the Color Wheel or some of the local paint stores in the area and inquire whether this individual has a commercial account there. So you have to think to yourself, what does a painter need? What would he use when you initiate an investigation like that? So the first step in a located investigation is to gather all your information, look through it closely, find out if there's any key pieces of information there that you should act on immediately, such as a telephone number. But if it's not there, then of course you want to verify that you have some correct information. Verify the name, the address. So the first step is going to be running a database of some type, like I had mentioned. The Nexus Lexus, Accurate, IRB, the newest product called TLO. These are going to let us know whether or not we have the right address, and also most likely identify the subject's most recent address, or an address that he has recently used. Utilizing this same database, we might just run the address. Leave the search name blank. This is going to show us all the other people that also use that address. And then, of course, we're going to look to see if they use the address at the same